more professionally. So what we do is basically to help organizations and most universities to bring a systematic kind of approach to harm reduction through policy research and education. And I am one of the co-founders and directors of Neurosight, and my background is in neuroscience, hence the name. And yeah, after doing Neurosight, I was just a bit frustrated about drug policies, so I also did science policy, and here I am.
Hiya, so I'm Eleri, and I'm here representing Students for Sensible Drug Policy UK, or SSDP UK, which is a UK-based network, which is part of a larger international grassroots organisation led by students all over the world who are committed to reforming punitive drug policies and instead advocating a harm reduction-based approach to drug policy and education. As an organisation, we believe that the war on drugs is a war on us, which does little to counteract the negative impact of drug misuse upon individuals and society. We operate as part of a large UK-wide network and also in university-based groups, which are called chapters. So I'm here speaking as the president of Durham University's chapter of SSDP, as well as an active member of the UK network. As a network, we neither condone nor condemn any individuals who choose to use illicit or legal drugs. We simply believe that individuals should have the right to make their own decisions about their own health and well-being. And in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the process of how we engage students through SSDP and what the benefits of this are.
Let's first have a look at how the last 12 months influenced the drug behavior of students. Before we dive into the data, I want to give a kind of quick overview because we've done different surveys since 2019, but because of the way they were sampled and all, it's not exactly comparable to give stats for them. But it doesn't mean we can't observe the general picture. By looking at the data since 2019, we've observed that the students who were using drugs regularly already, they started using more drugs or more regularly. And when we look at the students who use drugs occasionally, we've observed a polarization in the way that they use drugs. So while one group of occasional users, once the lockdown happened, if they were using drugs just to, go clubbing or, for nights out, once the lockdown happened, the venues closed, they couldn't buy their drugs from street dealers, then they weren't bothered to, push that activity, and we see a decrease in such student use. But some of the students who use drugs, their use continued and sometimes actually shifted to be more regular and became more about using drugs just for fun. We also, that's my wiggling student population. We also see a quite large increase in the number of students who are experimenting with drugs. And this is usually because the students kind of not being able to experience a proper freshers year or just a general university experience, and they were trying to satisfy their kind of sensation-seeking desires by experimenting with drugs. Right, so when we look at the types of drugs and the reasons for drug use, so our survey, the actual drugs that we led in April, which was the first lockdown, that coincides with the end of the academic year, show that a general increase for depressant drugs such as benzodiazepines and alcohol. But we were also very surprised to see by the increase of regular cannabis users, and this was accompanied by a decrease in the use of party drugs such as MDMA, cocaine, and ketamine. Again, this was expected because of the closure of venues. However, when we look at our most recent survey that we'll talk more in detail later, we've seen that the use of drugs such as benzodiazepines, alcohol, and cannabis, they stayed the same, while the use of party drugs were back up again. And this was related to the fact that now students were back in school and they wanted to do parties and all that. And again, as it was previously mentioned in other presentations, that in student population, usually drug use is quite occasional and unproblematic, and it's for fun or for experimentation. However, in the April survey, we've seen that there was a very clear shift from mostly using drugs for fun to using drugs as a coping mechanism, and this was a worrying trend. And we again, when we look at the drug use at the beginning of this academic year, we've seen that the regular use for, I'm going to say, negative reasons, so reasons such as coping, was still there, and in relation to the increase of the party drugs, that occasional kind of use for fun was back. And yeah, we are gonna discuss about what we are expecting in the next academic year later. So right, let's talk about our survey that we did together. So the survey ran during the whole of the second national lockdown, plus the 2 weeks after that. And the content was agreed with SSDP and the Drug Science Students Society, and we tried our best to target all students, although these surveys are always, they always suffer from self-selection bias. But we, offered Amazon vouchers and then got in touch with SU so that they would share it in their general social media pages. And in the end, we analyzed just over 1,000 responses. Again, to give a quick overview of the demographics, we had a nice representation almost from everywhere, but the most represented region was the northwest of England, and we had almost a double in terms of numbers, like more females than males, and undergrads made 75% of the respondents, while around 87% was between the ages of 18 to 23. Again, I'll avoid giving a prevalent stat because of all the limitations. However, if we look at the way drugs are used and which drugs are used, it's a familiar picture. So the most commonly used drugs being cannabis, ketamine, cocaine, MDMA, and nitrous oxide. Again, surprising finding being cannabis, students who use cannabis using it quite regularly. 29% reported using cannabis almost every day or every day, while 25% reported using it multiple times a week. These are very high numbers. So in other surveys, we always ask why they use drugs. So in this survey, we ask how regularly they use a drug for a certain reason to see the relationship between regularity and reasons of use. So on the graph on the right corner, bottom corner, you can see that the regular use was mostly associated with I'll say negative reasons, so reasons such as coping with boredom or going to sleep or escaping reality, and reasons such as fitting with friends or to enhance performance or socialization were at the bottom of the list. So we've also included a mental health screening tool called Kessler Psychological Distress Scale. This is used by multiple governments to scale their populations, and it's validated multiple times, and it says that if your score is higher than 12, you are likely to have a diagnosable mental illness with considerable disability. I mean, if you actually compare the shape of the graph with some other populations, then it is actually quite worrying that you know, the average is right at the threshold. The scores are really high, but we use this scale to group students as high scoring and low scoring students, so that we could look at the relationship between you know, regularity of use and reasons for use. So here we can clearly see that you know, there's a relationship between the regularity of use and the state of mental health. So students who are in the high scoring group, they are more likely to use illicit drugs more regularly to cope with their mental health. You can see some of the examples. However, our data doesn't differentiate between whether these students were intentionally using these drugs, knowing that, oh, you know, I read somewhere that medical cannabis had this, so I'll take this every day, or whether, you know, they started as occasional users and their body realized that it feels better, and then kind of suddenly shift towards a more regular and potentially problematic drug use pattern. So here we also looked at the relationship between regular use and feelings of dependence. Again, as expected, regular use is of course related to being you know, dependent, or this feeling dependent to a drug. But here again, our data showed very clearly that this relationship was there, you know, statistically significant for all sorts of reasons of use. But then again, here I only included some of the examples, but feelings of dependency was more common among regular users if the reason of use was related to mental health. So for instance, if you look at the difference between the feelings of dependency for you know, coping with anxiety and with fitting friends, you can see that there is quite a large difference. I mean, this is just to show that why you are using drugs makes a massive difference. So we've also asked about the consequences of drug use, and we provided them with the definitions, but of course there will be limitations related to the self-reporting of such issues. But 30% felt dependent, while 13% reported feelings of withdrawal symptoms and 8% reported feelings of addiction. You know, these are significant numbers, because we are talking about you know, all the students who are using drugs. 30% is a very high number. But I think what's most worrying is the fact that 16% of these students actually had a scary experience, but they did not ask for help. And this is usually related to the fact that students are just that they are scared of seeking for help, because they think that they'll be punished, and maybe that's not the case, but that's what they think, sometimes because it's not communicated, or the university has a kind of more obvious zero tolerance approach to dealing with things. But yeah, it's just a worrying number, which sometimes can make the difference between life and death. Obviously, none of this would be possible without drugs being accessible. So when we asked students, they reported that, 78% reported that they found it easy to obtain illicit drugs. And this was despite the lockdown. It just shows that how even something like a pandemic just doesn't really affect the drug trade. And usually this accessibility, the way students purchase drugs, it's also shifted from mostly street dealers to online purchasing behavior as well. So here you can see that 27% of students who use drugs, they bought their drugs through social media, while 10% bought their drugs through the dark web. This also results in, which we believe, an increase in the number of students who are involved in social dealing, because not all students will want to, go on the dark web or want to find social media. So, when we talk to students, they also say, "Oh yeah, if I buy something for myself, I also buy for my friends. Or if I bought something, I don't mind if I give some to my friends." So there was an increase in the students being involved in social dealing, which I believe has quite important implications for university policies, because knowing that a lot of the drug use is now happening on student campuses, on halls, and if these students are caught, I guess there should be more standardized and clear processes to that can accommodate the nuances when such incidents happen. So we've also asked questions about beliefs and attitudes around drug use, and I think the answer to these gives a nice clue to what we're expecting next year. So some of the more worrying attitudes around drug use, as you can see, for instance, 41% of the students who use illicit drugs reported that they had more reasons for using drugs this year compared to other years. So, which implies that they are justifying their drug use, and the reasons will still be there most probably in the next year. 56% believe that the risks and harms were worth consuming drugs. Again, I think this is a very important finding, because it means that these students already made their judgment about whether it is worth taking these drugs. It means they kind of assessed the risks with their experience, first-hand experience. Maybe they took MDMA and realized that it wasn't as bad as it was portrayed on the media, or I don't know what the university said, which also results in students losing their trust towards authorities, including universities, and it makes it much more difficult to engage them. We also see that 61% wanted to try other drugs if they get the opportunity, which means there will be demand to experiment more next year. And again, 32% said that they would take drugs more frequently if they could. Again, it's not a high number, but it's a significant enough number to make sure that these students understand the risk associated with frequent use. But there were some encouraging attitudes as well. So, for instance, 82% wanted to learn how to stay safe and reduce harm. So there is demand for more information. Students want to be informed, and I think if universities provide such information, it will also, such information in an honest and practical and relevant way, then it will also contribute to the trust issues between universities and students. Again, we see 38% actually wants to reduce drug use. Again, universities should do their best not to not reach out to these students, but creating an environment so that these students feel like they can approach their university if they are looking for help to reduce their drug use. And when we look at the stats by all of the students, we see that 88% are willing to talk to their friends about their well-being, and 84% reporting that they would take their friends' concerns seriously. Again, I think this is very encouraging. It also shows the potential effectiveness of interventions such as peer support and really facilitating a culture among students about peer support. So in light of these findings, what are we what are we expecting in the next academic year? Well, drug use has just been, increasingly normalized, but I think this year made it a lot more normal to take drugs for all students, and this is closely related to the fact that a lot of the drug use, the location of drug use has shifted from, clubs, venues to student halls and flats, meaning that some of the students who wouldn't be exposed to drugs normally because, the students who want to take their drugs and party do it in other venues. Now it was happening in just normal student house parties. And again, as you can see at the bottom, 74% of all students, that is, thought that drug use was commonplace in flat and house parties. And yeah, a lot of this drug use, I like to remind, that happens on campus. We've also observed that problematic drug habits emerged this year. Hopefully some of these habits, will break during the summer holidays, but if the restrictions come back and remote education continues, then I think very easily these habits will be back, especially for students who are using drugs as a coping mechanism when they are away from home. Again, in terms of the accessibility of drugs, both students and the dealers now adapted to the COVID, and everyone knows where to get their drugs. Next year, probably party drugs will be a lot more accessible and cheap because there was less demand this year overall. We have, a whole year of students who wanted to have a proper freshers experience, university experience, who just couldn't get what they wanted. And when they are back next year, they want to go for it. They want to go crazy. They want to party a lot. And on top of that, there will be another year of students and new freshers who are also dying to party. So we are just expecting a storm in that case. But this also brings worries around student deaths, because I'm sure everyone can remember that at the beginning of this year, there were a handful of student deaths, probably or avoidable deaths. And if students feel like they can't seek for help with the fear of being punished, then it wouldn't be surprising if we see more deaths next academic year. Eleri, what do you think? Would you like to add anything?
Well, I think that something we've got to consider, there was a really interesting BBC article where Kira Weir from Crew, a harm reduction organisation, pointed out that for a lot of students who've been using drugs during lockdown, their habits will have to change because their environment's going to be changed. And so, for example, as you've said, lots of people at the moment are using drugs in their flats, in their houses, in their student accommodation. And as you said, this illicit drug use maybe feels a bit more relaxed because there aren't any security guards to look out for. Drugs are more likely to be out on display, whereas I suppose in a club environment, it's a bit more hidden. You have to be more secretive with it. So the fact that this environment's going to change now, clubs are going to be open, festivals are going to be back up and running. People are going to be taking drugs in large crowds. There's going to be the threat of security, and this can cause feelings of anxiety, feelings of being worried about being caught. Just having to adjust to this new environment can be difficult, and that can interfere with people's drug experiences. Now, the risk of that is obviously people taking too much of a substance to curb these feelings of anxiety, people not able to enjoy themselves and therefore having negative experiences, particularly with psychedelic substances. So I feel like a lot of information that needs to go out regarding harm reduction towards the end of lockdown should be based around, you know, mental health aspect, making sure that people feel safe in their environment, and tips on how to adjust to this change.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Oh, my slides are frozen. There you go. So how we can best support students. Before we go into more kind of detail about how to do that, I think we had a couple of more stats showing yeah, what students think of this year's sport. Eleri, would you like to talk about that?
Okay, so this was really disappointing and showed a general lack of student satisfaction with the services they'd actually received from their university regarding drug harm reduction and regarding mental health support. So on average, students gave these services an overall rating of 40.1 out of 100. And also only 19% reported that their university had provided them with any information whatsoever regarding illicit drug use and harm reduction. And only 42% were actually aware that such services actually existed in their university, which I think just goes to show that an increased need for harm reduction education is needed to ensure that students feel supported, but also among student groups as well, like SSDP, we've been trying to counteract this by providing our own services, but obviously it's something that the university should be addressing themselves.
Oh, there we go. I put the graph there. Sorry. Right, okay, so what can we do to reduce harm and to keep students safe? I kind of tried to group the different types of use because like the emphasis should be on slightly different interventions regarding their needs. So, you know, on one side, we have students who are using regularly, as we talked about before. And on the other side, we have students who are using drugs mostly for fun, but obviously you can't just separate these two groups, and there is a very large kind of overlapping gray area that both kind of use happens. I kind of also try to summarize the main sources of harm that should be dealt with. So for the students who are mostly using drugs as a coping mechanism, then it means that usually these students are, you know, more experienced with their drug use. They are usually aware of some sort of harm reduction advice. But then most of the harm comes from the fact that they use these drugs very regularly, the long-term harms, not the short-term harms that most kind of harm reduction tips address. And on the kind of for the green group, because these students, you know, take drugs mostly in parties, then a lot of the harm comes from just like binge drinking, from kind of binge behavior. They tend to take much higher doses, or, you know, try the limits of their drug taking behavior. And we also see the group of students who are experimenting with drugs mostly in that category, and these students usually don't have you know, any experience, or they are not very well informed, or they are just doing something based on what they heard from a friend. So sometimes when these students take higher doses, or they don't know what sort of harm reduction you know, advices they could implement, or they don't know which drugs they shouldn't mix, which can sometimes end quite tragically. So, and I put luck in the middle for everyone, because sometimes, you know, you take a pill and it's a matter of luck whether that pill has just 3-4 times of what you should be taking. So, of course, there is a lot to improve regarding, you know, policies and different kind of procedures, but as a just like in medicine, like a first line treatment, education, drug education, just like sex education, I think that we should just provide information to students, because now just the fact that drugs are so accessible and are so commonplace, and they'll come across to it. I think all students should have access to information around drugs, but honest information. Again, peer support, we kind of talked about it, should just exist. The SUs can train certain students so that, you know, if a student has a question, they don't have to worry about confidentiality. And we know that for the kind of young adult kind of age group, they tend to listen to their peers more than the authorities. So I think it's essential that some sort of peer support mechanism is there. Again, assurance of no punishment if seeking help in case of emergency. Just the other day, I was actually looking at SSDP's Good Samaritan policy guidelines, so I would recommend everyone to have a look at that. This is just, I think, one of the most important like policies that should be implemented as soon as possible, because this policy will make the most significant difference in terms of preventing deaths. So when we look at the support to kind of support students who use drugs more regularly, then it's essential that information around drugs are integrated in resources around mental health, so that students have a better understanding of how mental health, you know, how drugs affect their mental health, and because drugs makes and breaks mental health. When we look at the survey data as well, we see that students say, you know, in terms of how drug use affects them most positively or most negatively, mental health is always in top 3. So students need to understand that when they are trying to help themselves, sometimes they might be breaking something else. And again, this is more about policy, just ensuring that there are support pathways without the risk of punishment. It's up to the university how they like to bring that, you know, what the nuances will be for different situations, but it should be there to make sure that students who need it can, you know, is not going to hesitate to ask for help again. Again, another thing we've observed while working with universities is sometimes when we talk to the university staff and they say, look, you know, in practice, this actually exists. You know, we don't punish students, but then students aren't aware of it. So having these policies and procedures in place are as important as communicating them clearly to the student population. And for the students who use drugs mostly for fun, again, drug use is about social life. You know, it facilitates students' social life, their relationships. So any innovative, you know, ways of facilitating that, and there are great presentations in this conference that talks about it, will indirectly affect drug use. And just to show one more time that like specific drug harm reduction is especially important for this group of, or for this reason of drug use, as we see more kind of mixing and matching of drugs and potential for harm. And this is just to give a bit more detail about what drug education can or should include. Again, implications of drug use for mental health, we've discussed, I'm not going to go into detail. Science to look to spot problematic drug use. When we do workshops, we try to always you know, give tools to spot or like questions to ask yourself so that you can reflect on your drug use, to see that if your drug use kind of shifting towards the more problematic kind of bit of the spectrum. I think equipping students with such tools is really important, so they can you know, they can reflect and monitor their drug use before things get more serious. Just like you know, we have a better idea of what problematic use looks like with alcohol. Even though we are not doing a great job, it's still slightly better than drugs. Again, risk related to purchasing drugs online. I don't think students are fully aware of it, especially in terms of the higher purity. And what to do in an emergency. Again, I couldn't help but put a couple of stats there, because you can see that 82% of all students know what to do if a friend has drunk too much alcohol, compared to 53% of students in the context of taking too much drugs. And again, sometimes it might just make the difference between life and death. All students should know this, even if they are not doing, using drugs, taking drugs themselves. They might be in a situation where their flatmate is in a horrible situation. And again, just general harm reduction information is essential. Okay, right. So we just want to finish briefly by telling you a bit more about what we do. I guess I'll go first. So as I told before, we try to bring harm reduction by combining research, education, and policy. So in terms of research, we try to do just to have a snapshot of important timeframes, just like the recent survey, but we also help organizations if they want to do research to for police to understand their population and all sorts. And in terms of education, we provide workshops, webinars, but we also create different educational materials, and this can be anything like a lesson plan that can be delivered online to posters, campaign materials, also staff training. And in terms of policy, we just help organizations write a new policy, usually through policy making workshops, which helps the people who are writing the policy to understand all the stakeholders involved, how different components of the whole thing affect students' behavior, and basically all sorts of things. Yeah, and this is just to give an example of a kind of holistic project we did with Leeds University Union. We did the research with them, and then we've helped them to run a campaign based on the findings of that research, because every regions or universities drug use is slightly different, and it's important to understand that, and tailoring everything around that. And then the union, we also help them write drugs and alcohol policy for the union. And another thing we are doing with a few universities this year is campaigns, which includes things like strategy meetings with the stakeholders so that they can find ways of collaborating. But it also includes, things like designing posters and delivering events, workshops, and strategy document is just something that we leave with the university, so that when the SU officers leave, the next SU officers have an understanding of the campaign. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. So as we've seen from the survey results, students do want to learn drug harm reduction information, but this isn't always easy when you're in an environment in university that has a zero tolerance drug policy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how SSDP UK has been engaging with students to provide drug policy information, harm reduction information during the pandemic, and how this operates as a network and as part of individual chapters. So during the first lockdown, lots of different members of SSDP chapters from all over the UK decided to reform the formerly defunct UK network. And this for us was a great way to continue to engage with students and push the SSDP agenda, despite lockdown restrictions having curbed our chapter-based activities. What we didn't expect was that the network expanded, and we've been involved in so many great projects with lots and lots of different partner organisations, such as Neurosight, which have not only demonstrated that there is a want for drug policy reform and improved harm reduction information among the student demographic, but we've really helped keep these issues on the agenda for universities throughout the pandemic. So, for example, we work with the NUS on the Drug and Alcohol Impact Programme, and we also, well, Two members, Dasha Anderson and Hannah Head, provided a write-up of easy testing kits and how universities should go about introducing them should they wish to. And this for us was a great way to show that students were passionate about getting these services into the universities through the SU. We also took part in lots of different international campaigns, which provided opportunities for students to learn about world drug policy and engage with our services online. So, for example, we took part in #SupportDon'tPunish and the International Overdose Awareness Day. We hosted webinars, which were free to attend to ensure they were totally accessible. We launched a sticker campaign, going around major cities, putting up stickers to raise awareness. And working with partner organisations has also provided us with an opportunity to provide different workshops and training programmes to allow student voices to be heard and to make sure that students are receiving the information that they're not necessarily getting from universities. So our methods of engagement are varied, and that makes them accessible to all, I believe. We've got a large presence on social media, so we're active on lots of different platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and being so accessible online and so visible is a great way to ensure that lots and lots of different students can access our resources, regardless of whether you've got an SSDP chapter at your university. So at the start of term, we gave out a freshers information pack, which provided harm reduction information on how to keep safe during Freshers Week. We've also hosted events which we advertise online and share online that allow lots of different students to engage with us. Once we built up our own profile, we were actually fortunate enough to be able to start launching our own events and our own webinars, which cover a wide range of topics from drug policy to drug science. Recently, we did a talk, a panel discussion on psychedelic research in a post-COVID world, which featured speakers such as Keith Abraham and Ben Sessa. And this was incredible. I personally came into this from an activist background. I have no background in science whatsoever. I'm an arts student, but sitting down, listening to Ben Sessa talk about psychedelic research, I was so fascinated. And I don't think I would have had the opportunity to experience this if I wasn't part of SSDP. Now, as an organisation, we host regular meetings and we run as a board, but we do allow non-chapter based members to join our organisation. So if you're in a university that doesn't have a chapter, you can still be a key member of our team. And over the pandemic, it's been amazing. We've seen a huge increase in new chapters being ratified, as we've got listed on the slides. And as a chapter leader, I can honestly say that these university-based groups are really great for helping students who do use drugs to have some sense of visibility in their university community and making sure that a support network is available to them if they feel daunted by approaching the university, particularly if it's got a zero tolerance policy. And this is especially positive, as we've seen from the survey. Lots of students do feel very dissatisfied with their university services. Now, I can say as a chapter leader that adapting to COVID has been really, really challenging. We've had to put a lot of our internal actions on hold and move a lot of our events and activities online. But nonetheless, we have been able to make significant changes. So, for example, we've been hosting online webinars instead of in-person discussions. We've resorted to social media campaigning, where we'd normally go about leafleting in student halls and university buildings. And in Durham, my chapter, we've been committed to listening to students' needs, and we actually hosted an open discussion session, inviting students to give their own opinions of the university drug policy, what they think could be improved, what they feel a bit daunted by. And this was actually fed back to the SU, to the university by the SU, and really helped us in our pledge for SU-funded testing kits, which I know other universities have had some success in securing, such as Manchester, for example. And if you're listening to this now and you don't have a university chapter, but you're thinking this is actually brilliant, we could do with one, I will post the links in the chat so you can get in contact with the UK network, but we'll help you set one up. So all you need to do is get in contact with SSDP Global and meet at least 2 of the following 3 criteria. But if you'd like to get in contact with me, just let me know and I'll put in the chat. in terms of the personal benefits, I mean, where do I begin? There are so many. But I think for me, it's kind of bittersweet. The biggest benefit that I found is the one that shouldn't have to be the case, which is the responsibility that I have taken upon myself as being a chapter leader. I mean, when you're affiliated with SSDP and you're visible in your university, people will rely on you for harm reduction advice and for drug education. I've had people contact me before calling an ambulance to check if it's okay, and that shouldn't happen. But being part of this and having that responsibility has really forced me to be hyper vigilant and educate myself. Over the summer, I just binge read all of David Nutt's publications, and for me that helped me to develop new interests in drug science and drug policy, whereas before I was more interested in the activism and the harm reduction side of things. At SSDP UK, we're all really good friends, which is kind of crazy because most of us have never met in person. But if you want to meet like-minded people and engage with the network, particularly if you're not part of a chapter, I'll post all the links in the chat and you can get in contact with us and join the network. And in terms of employment and creative opportunities, it really looks good on your CV to be part of an organisation like SSDP. We offer lots of different opportunities to engage that are tailored to people's needs and interests. So for me particularly, I really like writing. So I've used this opportunity to contribute lots and lots of different written articles to publications such as Voltfast and my university newspaper. And if you're interested in a career in psychedelic science, we also offer the Psychedelic Career Pipeline Scheme, which is a career opportunity specific to SSDP students. So now time for some questions, Arda. Okay, so this one's for you, I believe. It says, in terms of drug dependency, is that to feel a certain way, e.g. feel less depressed during lockdown or increase happiness, or dependency being related to using drugs to function in various areas, factor of life? So I think it's just to ask.
For the survey, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, to clarify what you mean by drug dependency on the survey.
Oh yeah, in the survey we defined it as to feel in a certain way. We didn't include a functional definition like that.
Okay. And then the second one is, do you think it would be better to provide advice to students to do drugs if that's their decision in the home environment, or when they feel safe rather than out in crowds? What do you think, Arda?
Well, I mean, okay, obviously doing drugs in a setting like club kind of gives you a safety net, but it shouldn't be like, oh, you should do drugs in the crowds if you decide to take drugs. Obviously, how you are feeling, if you're not feeling safe and taking drugs, then your experience won't be very good anyways, and even your tolerance to the drug will be different physiologically as well. So I guess if you have to give such an advice, you can say that wherever you are feeling safest, and hopefully with people who are not taking other drugs, and also including all the information around how they can, seek for help if anything happens, and from who.
I think as well, you also have to consider the risks that come with doing drugs in a home environment. At the start of term, I did an investigation for Voltfast on the results we predicted to see during first term of university. This was before we knew that there'd be another lockdown, of course, but we expected there to see an increase in students overdosing due to being in a home environment, because of course you don't have the risk of being caught as much as you would in a club, for example. People are more likely to have drugs out on display. People are more likely to see other people doing drugs. It will be more visible. And this could encourage people to take drugs they've never done before, to take more substances than they normally would. And I think that you've got to factor in that doing drugs in a crowd and doing drugs at home, they both carry their risks. And I wouldn't necessarily advocate one above the other. I'd say if you felt uncomfortable doing drugs in a new environment, start low, go slow, make sure you're with people you trust. And there are lots of advice online that you can follow. And I'm actually going to post in the chat bar now links to relevant social media and how to get in contact with SSDP UK if you'd like to start your own chapter or get involved with our network. Just loading up Facebook.
Oh, we only have 2 questions.
No.
There was another question, but the person said that you'd answered it, so
Okay.
I marked that one as done.
Okay.
Well, here's the link to SSDP UK. It's a Facebook group. If you'd like to join this, that would be great. Please do.
Eleri, I know that we've got a lot of people on the line who work in student unions. What can student unions do to kind of to be supportive of SSDP groups, or is there anything you'd like to see student unions doing?
Okay, well, personally, I've had a really, really positive experience with my student union. So the Welfare and Liberations Officer at the start of term got in contact with me, asked me what my plans were for the year, has been coming along to all the events I've hosted, whether that be open discussion sessions to talk about to discuss the uni drug policy, whether that be meetings with the university to discuss drug testing. So I would say if you are a university SU that has an SSDP, get in contact with the leader or the chapter president and just discuss plans, discuss strategies. And if you're in a university that doesn't have an SSDP chapter, I would say get involved with the UK network, get in touch with us, but also maybe host your own meeting, like your own open meeting to discuss the university drug policy. You don't necessarily need to be an SSDP to do that, but it is a good way to make sure that student voices are being heard and people feel that they have someone to talk to about drug policy and harm reduction. We've had some more questions, actually. Why do you think TikTok is an important tool for this work? Well, I'll answer this one. I think with TikTok, it's a social media platform that's popular with a lot of younger users and a lot of younger people. And there's been quite a worrying rise. We've seen DMS Foundation did a survey on it of young people buying drugs off sites like Snapchat, TikTok, social media dealing. And this is obviously something that parents don't necessarily see because it's on social media sites. And this is a whole new field, whole new risk. And I think that SSDP being visible on TikTok and being visible on platforms used by younger people is a great way to promote harm reduction and make sure that the drugs that they're seeing and the social media dealing that they're seeing going on is being countered by harm reduction information. And I think it's always a good idea to teach harm reduction at a young age. And then, how do you deal with resistance from the university? Have you had resistance from universities to you coming in, Arda?
Yeah, I mean, there's a thing, there is usually a variety of voices in a university. So usually putting all these people together and making them discuss helps. And it's just really important to positively engage everyone, because you can't just say, if they are resisting to your perspective, then you can't just say, look, this is the data, you are wrong. Then they won't accept anything from you anyways. So just really listening to them and understanding their worries, because a lot of the time, they are working in a university and they are worried about student safety. So saying, look, if you want to keep students safe, and look, you can see that you can't, I mean, what are you doing? And then talking about, okay, is what you are doing actually helping? If it's not helping, what it is indirectly causing? And just having these conversations openly and positively really helps with that resistance.
I agree completely. And I think that I'm personally coming from a university that has a zero tolerance drug policy. And I found that building a good relationship with the SU was a great way to feel supported in this and feel like I had the SU on my side when we were dealing with the university. And in terms of meeting resistance from the university, I haven't had much of an experience with it. There have been, some questions from staff, is this okay? Does this violate the policy? But I feel like if you explain it and you have, if you make it clear that you are doing this for the policy side of it and the harm reduction side of it and the SSDP, I feel like there is a lot of stigma, being part of SSDP. I have had people come up to me like, oh, it's just drug society, isn't it? But I feel like from building a proper platform on social media, being visible in the university, making it clear that that's not what we're about. We're not here to encourage drug use. We're here to make sure that people who want to do drugs are safe. I feel like if you make it really clear that that is your agenda and that is who you are, then the uni can't really complain about that, I guess.
I mean, sometimes the types of resistance we've experienced isn't the fact that, you know, like the arguments we are putting forward, but it is the fact that they don't want to be one of the first universities to kind of take the risk and do something so different or unusual. So, I mean, there is not a lot you can do apart from giving the examples of a couple of other universities who are doing this, because the biggest problem is a lot of universities just ask, oh, like, do you have evidence showing the effectiveness of these policies? Well, no, because they are so new, and it's not very easy to evaluate these policies. And in that case, I think the best thing for other universities who've already done some changes to do, you know, as a champion in this area, just speaking and sharing so that other universities are aware that this is happening and they are not the only one. Yeah.
And one final question we've had, could the university claim any legal implications encouraging safe drug use? I don't think so.
Just to say on this as well, we do have an excellent session coming up tomorrow from Stephen Cutter from Release and Hannah Head from SSDP, all about the legal ramifications, because that's through our work at SOS UK, is something that comes up, like universities take zero tolerance because sometimes they think that that's the only option.
Yeah, let's leave that answer of that question to the experts then. I forgot to say, I'm just going to share a link because if anyone is interested to read more about the survey findings, then we've done a webinar on it. And if you couldn't make it or weren't aware of it, the slides on our website now, so you can just download it for free. And hopefully in a couple of weeks, we'll just release the descriptive stats of all the findings and not just a subset of questions. Thank you. So, oh, it's 3:30. It's the end of our slot.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for everyone for coming, and thank you, Arda.
It was so excellent. Thank you so much to both of you for that session. It was really, really helpful, and I know I've learned a lot, so I'm sure everyone else will have as well. So we've got one more session coming up today. It's at 4 p.m. until 5 p.m. and it's on substance use and mental health. So we'll run on from this session really, really nicely. So go grab a cup of tea, stretch your legs, and see you back at 4 o'clock.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, Cara. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. Are you?
Very good, very good. Very excited for your talk.
Oh.
I had a look at the slides and they all look wonderful. So
Oh, gosh.
see how it goes. Should we do a quick tech check just so that we, everything's working ahead of the
Yeah, I shall
session?
try and share my screen.
Ideal.
Let's have a look. Oh. Got a few PowerPoints open, so I'll try and close the ones I don't need.
Yeah, that's always the trick, isn't it? Otherwise you might end up sharing the wrong PowerPoint.
Can you see that okay?
I can, yeah, that's all appearing perfectly.
Perfect.
Wicked. Is that the branding of Keel with the arrows? It's quite cute.
It's the branding of our mental health project that Keel leads on. Yeah, it's much nicer than the Keel branding, which is why I decided to use it.
I bet you'll be sad to say goodbye to it.
Yeah, I will, definitely.
Amazing. So you've attended a couple of the sessions, so you probably know all of this, but just so you kind of just to make sure that you do. While you're talking, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat box, and if anybody puts anything, if anybody puts something like, oh, I can't hear your audio or whatever, I'd unmute myself and tell you.
Okay.
And if anybody puts any questions, I'll get them to repost them in the Q&A box.
Okay.
And just then you can either, if you've got a point where you want to pause and answer questions, you can do that, or you can just save them till the end and do them.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. But
you don't have to keep track of if there's lots of chat in the chat box.
Yeah, that's a good function.
Wicked. Everything's gone quite technically fairly smooth so far. I feel like that's famous last words, isn't it? I'm holding a pencil, so I feel like maybe that's okay. Awesome. But yeah, if we've still got we'll probably start in about kind of 9 minutes or something, because we've been starting a couple of minutes late, just because everybody's always 1 or 2 minutes late rejoining. So if you want to go and grab yourself a cup of tea or anything, then feel free to do that.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll see you in a short while.
I'll see you shortly.